Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. First of all, I hope all of you fine folk are doing really well today. I feel very lucky to have this YouTube channel, to have you as my audience, and I want to take a second to reflect on that. And we're going to continue today looking at your questions and comments. And I really like this one from Eric, who says, one thing I miss is all the industry and logistics stuff Legends gave. There were multiple different mobile shipyards that the Republican Empire used to support its fleets, and there were several classes of smaller transports to keep them supplied. Despite its issues, the Star Wars navies felt like there was some thought in them instead of big ship gooder of canon. And that's an interesting point. One I agree with, but I'll say not fully. So today we're going to talk about some of the lore behind the things he mentioned, and I also want to talk about the relationship between canon and Legends in this aspect. If you just want to learn about shipyards and such, skip ahead. But is it true that Star Wars Legends focused more on logistics and industry? Well, to a point. Star Wars Legends is a lot like canon in that different books created by different authors felt vastly different. There were certainly some novels within Legends which pushed Star Wars more towards the military sci-fi end of the fiction spectrum. I think the best example of this is probably the Black Fleet Crisis. We learn about war games, how fleets maneuver, how assets are acquired, and how fleets are refreshed. And it's completely true that we've never really reached that level of detail in Star Wars canon. There have been times where we've come close. The Thrawn trilogy, the original canon Thrawn trilogy, that is, I think, is probably the best example. But the Black Fleet Crisis is great because it considers things like logistics, support vessels, ship supplies, things that you don't often see. But while that was the case for the Black Fleet Crisis, there are also many novels which don't even consider the issue. You read the Jedi Academy trilogy, for example, there are space battles. I've even done battle breakdowns for some of them, and it ends up being kind of big ship do-gooder. Or actually, in the Jedi Academy, Luke basically winning space battles with the power of the Force. But, and this is where I'm going to give the question a lot of credit, although Legends doesn't always feature these elements directly in the stories, there was a lot more in the expanded universe, whether introduced through source books, reference books, whatever, which fleshed out this aspect of the universe. For example, in a prior video, I talked about the field-secured container vessel. It was essentially a massive transport used by the Empire, sometimes reaching tens of kilometers long, depending on the loadout, and it was established as early as the Imperial Sourcebook and referenced in other material. Now, the FSCV has been brought over to Star Wars canon, but only in the most minimal way, a single secondary source. And really, Star Wars canon hasn't had its version of the Imperial Sourcebook, a foundational document laying out the lore. It's kind of funny because you look at the Imperial Sourcebook or the Star Wars Sourcebook, and you can see that it's essentially the foundation of the lore for the universe, outside of obviously what George Lucas created in the movies. Everything from the Inquisitorius and the ISB, to the Victory Star Destroyer and repulsor lifts, to really much, much more. It was established in these documents and still obviously heavily impacts how writers deal with the universe, despite them not being strictly canon. And of course, these original source books often dealt with issues like logistics because they were meant for people, nerds like myself, to run RPGs with. But what about space stations specifically? Well, I'd actually agree that Star Wars canon hasn't done as much as I would have liked with space stations. Probably my favorite space station moment comes from the Blade Squadron short story, which details the taking of Kuat, but we also have seen new designs prop up and be repeated across media, from Rogue One to Star Wars Squadrons. But Legends certainly did have the idea of mobile space stations, though I'll push back against the notion that they were common. Going back to the aforementioned Black Fleet Crisis, we learn about the Black 15 shipyards. The Black 15 shipyards were hyperdrive equipped and were moved specifically to the Kunat cluster so that the Avathans could be used for slave labor to not just create new ships, but it seems like more importantly to perform repair work on any ships in the sector. Obviously, when the Duskon League captured the Black 15 shipyards, they were used more directly to create their own navy. But one thing that's interesting is that Han Solo suggests, and to me it seems like this did happen, that the Avathans would be moving the shipyards in order to protect themselves and maintain security. And I mean, for other shipyards, you attach hyperdrives to them or attach hyperdrive to tug-like vessels, and you can probably move them across space. And the Empire was known to aggressively position shipyards in hot spots within the galaxy. Again, not only to create new vessels, but to repair and restock the already existing vessels in that part of space. But that wasn't necessarily common. We see throughout Star Wars Legends that shipyards are really juicy targets. Thrawn goes to Sluis Van to try to steal New Republic ships under construction. Fondor is, like always, the site of major battles because of its impressive shipyards in system. The reason why shipyards don't often move is, one, because they take advantage of nearby planetary defenses, but two, because they rely on the assets of nearby planets to stay alive. Kuat, for example, had a ring of orbital shipyards, quite famously, but it would have relied on its home planet, probably for energy, pure resources, security, and more. Shipyards sometimes came in unexpected packages. You can argue that World Devastators, given their technological supremacy and abilities, were mobile shipyards. You can take a World Devastator, drop it on a planet where it consumes resources, and have it spitting out fighters, or potentially even larger ships in no time. I believe the Death Star could have been easily reconfigured for that purpose, as could have Palpatine's entire operation during Dark Empire. The Yuuzhan Vong were also really well known for creating their ship wombs. The Yuuzhan Vong only used biological technology, so when they captured planets, one thing they would sometimes do is seed it with these ship wombs, which would begin producing new vessels. There were also various shipyards which, either through direct statement or through implication, could move across the galaxy. Deep space manufacturing facilities, like we see in the TIE Fighter game, seem pretty clearly capable of moving, and really I get a feeling that a lot of these smaller repair stations or manufacturing stations probably could be shuffled around the galaxy. For a very large shipyard, I don't think that was very common, but you could probably disassemble it or move pieces, even if the entire structure could not be moved while continuing to operate. The Rebel Alliance certainly would have had flexible options which they could set up in deep space and move if necessary. For the Empire, as alluded to, the Black 15 shipyards are a good illustration. The Imperial Sourcebook also alludes to deep docks, which were hyperspace-capable shipyards used mostly for repair and to help secure power in different sectors of the galaxy. The last thing I wanted to mention was the Harbor-class mobile space dock, and this is where my mind immediately went upon reading the question, mostly because I remember an image from a canon reference book where the dock is servicing Mon Calamari cruisers, and one is clearly the Legends design for the Viscount. Anyway, the Starships and Speeders book gives a nice overview. It says that the Harbor class is a true rarity, a hyperspace-capable mobile space dock. They were extremely valuable, most used by the Empire, but a few captured by the Rebel Alliance. They possessed not only a hyperdrive, but defensive emplacements, though they were still massive targets. But that's really all I wanted to cover, besides for super weapons like the Death Star or the Starforge, which had either some or amazing manufacturing capability. I think this is a good look at the topic. Let me know your thoughts, of course, on all this and more down below.